It's a Quake.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bertha, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. So we're talking about youth and civic engagement, digital civic engagement, and I'm joined by my brilliant panelists. So right over here, we have Ms. Rosaline Joseph, who's a board member for the National Youth Council. Right next to Rosaline, we have William Minnie, who's the chairperson of the Nanso NUST branch. After that, we have Nonge Kanji, who's the youth advocate for the Trade Union Congress of Namibia. Right next to Nonge, we have Wayne Rickitt, who's a candidate attorney. And over there in the corner, we have Lloyd Angula, who's a human rights activist. Right next to Lloyd, we have Selma Moses, who's our sign language interpreter for today. And last but not least, we definitely have Napopio Lenga, who's a teacher at the Hearing Impaired School in Windhoek. So those are my brilliant panelists for today as we tackle youth and civic engagement in a digital world. So a couple of things that we really want to bring out in this discussion before I get into my first question directed at Nonge will really be unpacking what is the condition of democracy in Namibia, right? We're trying to also understand the relationship between civic engagement and democracy with a specific focus on digital democracy and the implications of a lack of digital tools on young people who don't have those tools, right? So what are the implications of these differences? What does democracy look like? Does it look a certain way? And just how are we going about strengthening democracy as it relates to young people right now in Namibia? So our very first question is going to be directed to Nonge. So Nonge, you are, the youth advocate of the Trade Union Congress of Namibia. So in that position, there's an assumption that you understand with the work that you do, the power of unions, the power in numbers. So if you could just speak to us a little bit about what is the extent of the value that is found in social networks as it relates to digital democracy and youth civic engagement, the benefit of unions in manifesting the democratic process.
Thank you, Bertha. Well, firstly, as a youth advocate under our National Trade Union Congress, I would have to explain the value and the true definition of what the Trade Union Congress is. Firstly, it is an umbrella body governing all the different trade unions across our country, meaning those working in the teachers' unions, those working in labor, those working in different areas of our workforce are all governed by our National Trade Union Congress. So firstly, it operates as a representative body. But most importantly, it operates as a representative leg in a tripartite structure, along with the government and along with the employer structures, all governed under the International Labour Organization. Now, the International Labour Organization is the only UN agency that has a tripartite structure. So particularly relating to democracy, this allows for every single Namibian who is employed in any sphere, be it formal or informal, in any structure, to be able to relay their issues and to be able to advance their issues all the way up to the International Labour Organization. So we have that check and balances system that allows for a true democratic relaying of Namibian workers' voices. Now for young people especially, this is so relevant for us because as we know, it is the trade unions that has advanced labor issues, not only for young people, but for many Namibians throughout the years. From our colonial liberational struggles up until now where we're facing modern issues of harassment in the workplace, violence in the workplace. These are all issues that have been democratically relayed by the voices of young people in Namibia. Starting from the late 1970s, late 1980s, we have seen a transformation in our workplaces because young people have taken the stand and decided that through democracy, we're going to advance our country. So I'm quite proud to be associated with the National Trade Union Congress.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nonge. And I'm glad you bring up the tripartite structure. And this really speaks to the presence of bureaucracy, administrative legislation. And that leads into our next question, which is to Wayne. And Wayne, you're a candidate attorney, right? So just with your personal experience with the law, how do we use the law as a tool to enhance young people's civic engagement? So is there some kind of nuance that you have as a young person who's familiar with legislation that might not be apparent to other young people, that might make you more attentive to nuance in terms of achieving change through democracy?
Thank you, Bertha. I think as a young lawyer and obviously as an aspiring legal practitioner, it's important to understand that the basis of our democracy is our constitution, right? We live in a dispensation where Namibia is now founded upon constitutional democracy. So we've moved away from parliamentary sovereignty, which was a political theory and a system in place before independence. So now constitutional democracy governs us. The black text and letter of our constitution is the basis of our democracy. But within that, we can say that it's also woven in with elements of representative democracy, which is also one of the accounts of contemporary accounts of democracy, as well as elements of direct democracy as well. But of course, direct democracy is a concept now very archaic, and you can even argue, as some theorists argue, that it's become obsolete. But direct democracy is very handy in terms of allowing the citizen, the ordinary citizen, to have a direct influence upon how society is governed. Now, that being a concept considered very archaic, I think constitutional democracy is, for it to survive in where we are going in the digital age, I think digital democracy then becomes an absolutely important discourse alongside participatory democracy, so as to keep democracy alive in the digital era. And we all know that as young people, our engagement with the law is dead unless you make it come alive. So our engagement with the law is limited at the moment. For the law to speak to us as young people, we need to make it come alive. And one of the ways that we can do that is to digitize how the law speaks to us, how the law speaks to our contemporary norms, our contemporary values, how the law speaks to our governing democratic systems and institutions. And I think we need to develop systems as young people where we take the law on digital platforms, where we engage with the law for the law to stay alive and for the law to promote democracy. And I think with the apps and applications that we have, that is not too far off. I think practically speaking, mere engagements on Twitter and Instagram can go a long way. And that obviously puts an onus to some of us that know some of these nuances in terms of the law and sometimes in terms of the Constitution and acts of Parliament to actually lead these discussions. Because the ordinary citizen on the street does not have these tools to effectively engage and therefore does not know what democracy as a concept entails and what democracy practically looks like. So these are the conversations that we as young legal scholars have to drive in this country.
Thank you, Wayne. So when we're talking about participatory democracy and the law coming alive to different young people, I'm thinking about the differences that exist among young people in terms of the access that they have to different digital tools. And that brings me to my question to you, William, which is, as the NANSO-NUST branch chairperson, how do you factor that difference of access and resources in your service to your constituents as it relates to youth civic engagement?
Firstly, Bertha, we as NANSO face many socioeconomic barriers. Not just from the university side, but let's take the country as a whole. We as NANSO, we have constituents in rural areas who do not have the means to communicate and to reach out and to actively participate. And however, our National Executive Committee has made it a priority for us to engage and to reach out to these constituents who cannot participate. Recently, the NANSO's Vice President, Comrade Luciano Gambala, led a delegation to rural areas in the Kunene, Oshana, Ohangwena, and Ochotonjupa regions. This visit was to basically go to see, to analyze, to understand what's happening on the ground, and to maintain the link between the organization and the constituents in rural areas. And now moving back to my jurisdiction, which is NUST. My team and I, the BEC, which is the Branch Executive Committee, has also made it its top priority to engage the students, whether it's via social media or if it's physically on the ground, to just maintain the engagement and to promote civic engagement as well, civic participation, and for us to understand what they face so that we, as student leaders, can intervene and push the agenda.
Awesome. Thank you, William. So I think when we talk about pushing the agenda, that really leads me to ask about what the priorities of democracy should be, what should be at the forefront when we talk about youth civic engagement. And that leads me to my question to Loide, actually. So Loide, you are a youth and human rights activist. And we're talking with Loide in the lobby, and I think this might be the most delicate question, but I think it's important, and I think Loide can handle it. So Loide, what does democracy mean to you within the context of human rights, and specifically within the context of Namibia right now? So the context that I'd like to call on here is speaking at a SWAPO party mass mobilization rally that was held in Ongwediva a couple of days ago. Our Honorable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of International Relations, Honorable Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, said, quote unquote, SWAPO will be here to stay today, tomorrow, and forever. So just to that effect, Loide, what do you think the priority of democracy should be? Is it to ensure the continuity of a particular party? We are a politically free country, or is it to ensure the livelihoods of people? Is it both, or are those two mutually exclusive?
Thank you, Bertha. I would like to start off with the notion of activism, seeing that I'm sitting amongst a lot of activists here. Most youth have a misconception that activism should be something on a large scale, should be organizations, should be rallies, demonstrations, whatsoever. But people need to understand that activism starts on an individual basis. You talking to your friends, you talking in your class, social media, for example. Just a small tweet or post could influence a lot of people, and that pushes for greater good. Now, people also need to understand that the primary drive for civic participation is need. And this occurs when there's a gap that people in society identify. So coming to you, Bertha, now, your question. When there's a need or a gap in society, this is about pushing the livelihoods and sustainability of people in society. They see that there's change that needs to occur, that the people in the government have not maybe focused on or touched on. And most political parties, regardless of which political party it is, see this as a basis for which they can push in order to gain support now. And yes, I would like to say they coexist because parties use this to their advantage in order to gain supporters, and people within community that now see that there's a lack in government also try to participate by now creating NGOs, basically civic participation. So they coexist. Relating to what the Prime Minister said, whether people will come and go and the political party will still remain, just shows that there's a strong stance and lack on the social status of what do I want to say? There's a lack on the current, just give me a moment. There's a lack of advocacy of what the people in society on the ground want and what the political parties are advocating for. So whether they come and go, what the Prime Minister is saying, doesn't matter, because be it there's political parties or not, the youth will always participate by creating non-governmental organizations, by creating civil societies, by protesting, by posting on YouTube, by being activists in general, be it on an individual basis, be it on a large basis. And we've been seeing this, seeing the creations of more protests through the past 2-3 years, seeing more uproar on social media, and just seeing more youth become more youth participating in economic and civic participation in general, and them engaging.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Lloyd. I recognize that was a bit of a dense one, so thank you for taking that on. So my next question is actually for Napopye. So when we talk about young people engaging in different ways, and as Lloyd has brilliantly pointed out, you know, young people will always engage. So my next question is really speaking to what are the ways in which young people have been failed by government as it relates to giving them the mechanisms that they need to maximize and optimize their engagement. So when we argue that young people are disengaged and lazy, who is to blame? Is there anyone else to blame but young people? And do different young people have different reasons for not being engaged where they're not engaged?
Thank you so much for the question. I think for us, I'm going to speak on behalf of the youth with disabilities, because many a times we are seen as second-class citizens. So we, at times, have got our own organizations where we don't feel like we're getting any support from government. So most of us that are living with disabilities are actually suffering. So we are, of course, now losing interest in participating in civic duties because we don't see, we are not given the platforms to actually be able to participate. Sometimes you see things on social media, but because perhaps there's no sign language, you won't be able to understand what they are saying. For instance, when you're at universities and you graduate, many times they look at you as a deaf student and think, after you've graduated, what job can you do? You'll probably do those menial jobs. Maybe they can give you as a cleaner, because they look at us as, you know, we're not on par as them. The reason why I think they are not participating is because we are suffering, we are left to fend for ourselves, we don't have access to tertiary institutions, and many times you want to get into a college, there is no sign language interpreter, you will not be able to hear what the lecturer is saying. So I think instead of us focusing on those other things, that's on civic duties and civic engagement, we are trying to fend for ourselves, we are fighting for our own challenges that we're trying to find solutions to. So those are the things that we're focused on. So I think government is not really giving us a chance or opportunities to be able to participate, or they are not capacitating us enough to be able to participate just like any other persons. So we have so many challenges that are unmet, or so many needs that are unmet, and at times we want also to study and become an engineer, but then you are told, but you're a deaf student, you cannot study that module or that course. So we get bored, we lose interest in many things that has to do with civic duties, and then we just end up perhaps trying to see what other means can we take on for us to continue surviving. So I think that's where the challenges are. The challenges are not given to us as youth with disabilities. So I'm advising that perhaps we can raise more awareness with government officials, that we can have meetings where we engage and then we tell them what are the challenges so we can level the environment. Right now, we are not footing on the same level as other citizens of the country. So I think that's where I will end the question.
All right. All right, thank you so much for that, Napopye. So just in speaking to the challenges that are faced by young people, I think my next question will go to Rosalind. So Rosalind is a board member of the National Youth Council. So what does the NYC do to minimize the challenges that Napopye has pointed out? So for different kinds of young people, could you speak to us about some of the intentional, deliberate work that goes into making sure that all the challenges that are posed to young people as it relates to participating in the democratic process, how does the NYC mitigate those challenges?
Okay, so firstly, let's just start off by why NYC was established as a voice for the youth. NYC as an institution is standing there to be able to advocate for youth issues. So now, not only I'm sitting on the board as a representative for people with disability, but however, when you are on the board or when you serve on the institution, is that you serve the whole youth at large, and not only specifically that. So now when it comes to people with disability and NYC, is that I have to ensure that every program that is put out there is accessible to people with disability. And one thing NYC also did is they established an organization for people with disability, NOID, which is the Namibian Organization for Youth with Disability in Namibia. So that we have an organization that is an umbrella of all different types of disabilities, so that if a program comes out, we are able to also tell that organization, and the information runs down to every member of that organization. But however, I think that hopefully in future we can have more disability organizations that are affiliated to the NYC. And the other thing is also that we should understand, or how we contribute as NYC to democracy is that, let me just start off by the structure. Most or majority of the board members for National Youth Council are elected representatives at the AGM, meaning that it is the youth that actually put them there. But now, when it comes to us, I was appointed, I was not elected. But this is because, you know, when it comes to democratic processes, right, majority word goes. So now, for people with disability, the question is, how do they participate and engage in different institutions and platforms? Who is their representation? Because even if I had to stand for elections, if we are talking in all honesty, how many people will think that I am actually capable of going to speak for people with disability? So it is better to actually appoint just to represent and have an inclusive system.
Awesome. Thank you, Rosalind. So I think as we sort of get into the second half of our panel, there is a specific question that I'd like to pose to all the panelists. And sorry to put you on the spot, Wayne, we're just going to start with you. So something that we haven't quite touched on as much as I would like for us to is the discrepancy that exists between organized, formal, quote-unquote, political activity and sort of the kind of political activity that a lot of young people resort to that is not as sort of structured, it's not as embedded in bureaucracy. So I'm talking about some of the protests, for instance, or, you know, just something that is not, it's not institutionalized rather. So I'm wondering whether we think there can be some kind of reconciliation between quote-unquote informal political activity and more organized structures, what that reconciliation would look like, and if that's at all possible for maximizing democracy's effectiveness. So we'll just start with you, Wayne.
Thank you, Bertha. I think that question dictates that then we have to categorize what informal political activity is and what formal is. And to my thinking, these words, from a constitutional perspective, for example, Article 17 speaks about peaceful political activity. Arguably, that dictates formal political activity, and it goes on to talk about every citizen having a right to be part of a political party, and therefore to be able to engage in democratic activities of the country. And there's also a specific word that it uses. It uses the word influence, to influence our systems of governance and government, for example, to hold them accountable. Now, if you look at these words, I think semantics dictate that the word peaceful really illustrates some form of formality. And the word influence also dictates some form of organization, you know? So I think from that kind of perspective, informal political activity on the part of youth would initiate or speak to something like riots and uncontrolled violent protests. And I don't think that's a sustainable approach. It doesn't build anything, at least in my view, other than cause havoc and destruction. So I think there's a better way we can engage our political systems, and there's a more constructive way that we can do that. And this is through dialogues, for example. What we have here, these kinds of discussions, panel discussions, workshops, for example, having rooms where we can caucus bread and butter issues and find solutions practically, having advocacy campaigns, for example. When our democracy and free and open and internet is at stake, for example, through government policies and laws, even the mandatory SIM card registration is a very controversial issues. I mean, we have to balance interests, for example, national security and our rights to a free and open internet, for example, that stand possibly to be censored. So these kinds of activities and all other bread and butter issues in our nation have to be followed through from a very thoughtful and conscientious approach. I don't think violent outbursts and riots and just total disorganization will solve anything. I think we need some form of formality, and unfortunately, our youth of today, and me included, are very quick to act in very erratic ways that really do not build something sustainable. And I think politics, when people hear the word politics, especially on the streets, they understand it as taking things into their own hands. Well, that's okay. That's activism, right? You stand up for what is not right. Democracy dictates that you as a citizen have a right to hold those that you've elected into account if something is not right. But that does not dictate, nor is there any precedent to say that you need to take things to an extent where you can actually break laws.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wayne. And Nonge, I think just moving on to you, I saw you nodding your head a lot when Wayne was speaking. And I'm specifically interested in sort of the take that we are, there's no order and there's no effectiveness in disorganized political activity. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, whether democracy looks a certain way, whether there's a legitimate, objectively more efficient way of engaging in the democratic process for young people, or whether that's self-defined.
I would have to add the perspective of the Trade Union Congress and international trade unions in general. They say that there is no polite way of asking your oppressor for freedom. There is no polite way to say, can you please allow us to advance our socioeconomic interests or our health interests, whatever interest that is near and dear to us per our constitution. However, we cannot absolve people of the responsibility of order and structure in advancing our own interests, because at the very end of the day, whether we want to admit it or not, the responsibility lies within us and it lies upon us, and therefore the consequences of our actions will lie upon us as well. We have seen the results of violence on our economy. We have seen the results of disorganization on our economy, and particularly for young people. So I would implore every young activist to, yes, advance yourself, yes, advance the interest, but to do so with that same passion and that same vigor and that same zeal, but to do it with the understanding and the acceptance that at the very end of the day, the consequences will lie within us and upon us as young people.
Awesome. Thank you, Nonge. And William, just coming to you. So with the zeal and the vigor that Nonge mentions, so one thing about zeal is that, it's not sustainable, sort of as Wayne pointed out. The zeal that sort of acts as the genesis for movements, for protests, for political activity that's not institutionalized is not sustainable. Could you speak to us a little bit about how you ensure sustainability in the work that you do for students, in the work that you do to make sure that there's a continuous engagement with the democratic process? How do you make it sustainable when zeal dies out?
Personally, Bertha, the zeal cannot die out. Where there is passion and we are young people, and we have seen through social media, through the digital world, we have seen that there is zeal and that the zeal does not die. There is passion, and I implore and I encourage my peers to continue with that same passion, because there's a fire within us, because we can see what is currently happening in our country. We can see that there's democracy in certain parts of our country only. We can see these things through the comments, through retweets, through quote tweets on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. Even in the first session of this conference, we saw how the youth was engaging. Now that zeal cannot die, because without the zeal, we have seen this back in the liberation struggle when the young people, when the Nanso Keita started with that zeal. So we must continue. We must continue engaging robustly in order for change to come, because we as the youth, we form majority of the demographic of this country, of the population demographic. Therefore, we must push. We must hold our leaders accountable, robustly so. But with that, we must also know that there come consequences. But as we are also stating our rights, we must also know our constitution in the same time. We must know what our constitution says, because we cannot also claim rights that we don't know or are not informed of. So it comes back to being informed and being educated. So I believe that we must educate ourselves in order to build the zeal, run with the zeal, in order for us to achieve something in the long run.
Awesome. Thank you, William. So, lady, just to you. So, both Nonge and William have spoken about the consequences of claiming our rights, or the consequences of taking robust political action. I'm wondering how you reckon with and deal with those consequences in your activism as a young person, because activism is almost necessarily characterized by that zeal. So, how do you deal with those consequences that may or may not be anticipated in the work that you do?
Thank you. Democracy is noted to be as inclusive of everybody. But also, on top of that, democracy is also known to be one of the worst governments, apparently, to run a country. When it comes to activism, people always have to push for the agendas they believe in. People have to go to an extent to be radical in order to be heard and in order to make impact. I would like to give reference to, I think, last year's Shut It All Down protest. It made such a big impact. We were recognized not only regionally, but also globally. So the consequences of this could work hand in hand. They could come out as very good or come out as very bad. But as an activist, you always have to make sure that as you advocate for whatever it is you advocate for, it should not infringe on another person's next right. It should not infringe on their dignity, on their privacy, etc., all the constitutional rights that are protected in the Bill of Rights. But for the most part, people advocate for things that they feel they're oppressed against, and they need to push for this. So I believe on the aspect of activism, it's always pushing for better consequences, therefore. So I feel like it works always good.
Awesome. Thank you, Loide. So something that you bring up a lot is sort of people advocating for things that they believe in. And I think my next question is going to go to Napopye when we talk about, people activating for being activists for causes that they believe in. So something that Napopye has mentioned, is sort of the lack of mechanisms in place specifically for hearing impaired people, for making sure that they're able to participate to their fullest potential. And I'm wondering how Napopye translates sort of that sentiment and that anger into his work as a teacher at the hearing impaired school in Windhoek.
I think first and foremost we must start with government for them to understand fully what democracy means. Because if we feel left out, then we also then at times feel like we want to perhaps be radical and sometimes you don't even know how to express or how to show that you are also affected. But many a times the challenge that I see is that government is mostly focused on urban areas, whereas a whole lot of people with disabilities that are suffering, that are really vulnerable, are in the remote areas. So it's for us now to perhaps, at work, what I try to do is to raise awareness with the children, and also hoping that government can see that most of us that are in rural areas, or people that are in rural areas, are not accessing any services. If you look at our country, for example, in Parliament, there's no sign language interpreter today. So for us as deaf, the community, we don't even hear what the debates are happening in Parliament. And the number of interpreters that are around now are so minimal. If you use one, then when a deaf person gets sick, for instance, they are not able to go to hospitals because then they are not able to communicate with medical officials. So it's for us perhaps to meet the minister, perhaps to meet the president and try and raise awareness for us to feel that we are all Namibian in the Namibian house. Government is also not forthcoming with the resources for us to be able to get what everybody else is getting. So it's my hope that in future that government see that those with disabilities and us with disabilities should get the same resources and services.
Awesome. Thank you, Napopye. So our last question, the last question I'll pose is to Rosalind, this before we take questions from the audience. So Rosalind, I'm just wondering whether you think there's any room for creativity or sort of self-directed innovativeness around creating our own resources for participation. So something that Napopye brings out a lot is this lack of provision of resources. And I'm wondering whether in the work that you do, is there any way in which we can be crafty? And I'll be quite frank, and the reason I'm asking that is because we've read, I think it was the beginning of this year or early last year, where our Honorable President has said the government is not God. And he was talking about that within the context of jobs. But right now, within the context of this conversation, is just wondering, is there any way in which we can create our own resources to participate in the democratic process, or is that always the responsibility of government?
Okay. Okay, firstly, can I please add to the protest question that you were
Yes.
talking about, whereby you say, did you call it bombastic protest? Robust
Yeah.
protest, sorry. So now, I just want to highlight that even in our constitution, Article 17 clearly states that any Namibian citizen should participate in any political activities for as long as it is peaceful. So now when we're talking about the youth protesting about issues that affects them or they feel like their voices are not being heard on certain issues. So when we are looking at the protests that have happened in whatever particular issue that have been burning the youth, is that were those actually peaceful protests or were they harmful? Because the Constitution says the only time that, like let me say, a protest can become problematic is when people are protesting and they are armed. So it's just a question that, first of all, the Constitution encourages us to participate in peaceful political processes, which is protest. Protest, I don't think, is not peaceful unless the people that are protesting are actually armed. And getting back to your question that you asked me right now, I think that it is very important to know that each and every citizen is also responsible to contribute to their country which they are from. Yes, the government is absolutely the main, let me say, institution to promote democratic processes. But how do we engage as youth in processes? And I will refer back to that article. It continues to say that every youth can participate in any or join any political party which they wish. So now, how do you also create resources for yourself? I'm not sure if your question is also about employment or just the democratic process, because I think those are two different things.
Just the democratic process.
How do you create resources? Number one, obviously, the civic organizations that the youth create or establish in order for their voices to be heard, that is already creating a resource whereby it's a platform that you create that you can voice out your challenges and issue. And also, advocacy is also another resource to raise awareness around whatever issue that you are advocating for as a youth. And the other thing that I also think that is very important is the economic empowerment of youth. Because people say that they only respect you when you have more money, right? And I remember the Youth Week for the National Youth Council, we were promoting agripreneurship, whereby we were encouraging the youth to take part and participate in creating, whether it's producing, agricultural products which they can sell and get something for themselves. So I hope I did justice to that. And also that contributes to the economic of the country, obviously, which is also a democratic process and all.
Awesome. Thank you, Rosalind. So we are now going to be taking questions from the audience. If there are any questions at this point, we'll take them. Yes.
When the young people are talking about protest, like I see how active you are protesting. I remember a few years back, NASFOF basically rejected 12,000 students' loan applications or whatever, and they were protesting. Out of 12,000 students, only 300 students came in front of NASFOF offices and protested. Imagine if 12,000 students are coming and protesting, asking for their rights. How many things would have changed? To me, you guys are very active maybe in Facebook or in TikTok or whatever nonsense it is, but not in reality. That is a problem now. You are looking at two institutions sitting here, NUST and UNAM. There are literally 40,000 students you are talking about, 40,000 graduates here. Imagine 40,000 people are standing up asking for change this. How things would change? You need to have brave if you want to change. You guys don't have that guts. You walk out here, go out, that's it, you forget everything. That is the kind of activist you are. Nothing is going to change in this country. It will continue. People like, you go and protest on Chinese shops. That guy, Michael Musharela, whatever it is. He's going and shutting down all these things and you're protesting and he got arrested now. He's sitting in jail. That's not how you protest. They are changing policies, they are doing everything, and this guy is some Chinese guy doesn't even know how to speak English. He's sitting a shop there, and you are going and close the shop. What is he going to say now? I don't know anything what you are talking to me. That's how you will talk to you. You guys are, I really like finding it very shocking. You guys are talking as if so stylish here. We are not in Europe here. You are in Africa. Already 80% of the people in Windhoek suffering. Majority of the capital city population is sitting in informal settlements. That's a shame. We are not changing anything. You talk about youth. What youth you are doing now? I really have a serious question. I have this question a long time ago. Change your attitude. If you want to protest, go down on the streets. They should feel it. Thank you.
All right.
I don't have, well, this is, Vijay is my colleague at the university. Those are his views, not, not the views of the University of Namibia. I'm the acting vice chancellor now. Anyway, that's on the light note. I think context is always very, very, very important. I'm not telling you what to do. I think most of you are doing wonderful work in your wonderful activities. And I think sometimes when parents or people who are a bit older, they have certain expectations, so they speak the way Vijay is speaking. He's speaking from that point of wanting more focus and all those other things. But I just want to say you are doing very well. You are doing very well as young people. And look, 60% of this population is young. And these people who are protesting in Windhoek and what, Windhoek, there's only about 400,000 people. So whether the young people in Windhoek go to Chinatown or they do, that's not a representation of the whole country. But it is a fact that there's injustice. So for me, in any way, whether you are fighting injustice on social media, whether you end up on the street, people always see the result of a protest, but they don't realize that at the protest, somebody designed the poster of that protest to put on social media. Somebody brings the water. So when they look only at the outcome, there's a lot of things that happens people don't understand. As far as I'm concerned, when we go and protest on the ground, why would I want a young person who's a friend of mine, who's an activist, who's working for the intelligence, why would I want them to be in the street? Why would I want a medical doctor who's helping our people? Why do I want that person to protest with me when we need to save people in the hospital? Why would we want everybody to expose a young person who's in the police? You know, when these police come and brutalize, some of those young police officers from a special field force, they say, hey, Chief, we are coming. Can you quickly organize so that we can disperse? So I think there is a contest, Vijay, to how these things are happening. It's not just about the numbers. In fact, when the country got independent, people never went to Sam Nujoma Stadium and they say everybody. It starts with one and then it becomes two. You know, at one point when we went to Klein-Ekupe, 3 of us, some of our family members, they say, hey, you are not a part of this family. You know, and then those things happens like that. Then say, yeah, you are bringing shame to the family. What type of, who's this child? This child is a child of a Kufut and what. When I became mayor, they are the one who are organizing business people to speak to me. I said, no, I don't do those things. What am I trying to give you? Those two parallel of extremes. One day the activism is bad for the family, but another extreme activism is good for the family. So you don't need to be understood by Vijay, a friend of mine, or anybody else in terms of your activism. For as long as we are very clear, management by objectives. What is your objective? What is the end result? But he may be correct if you don't have an objective of your activism. I don't have a problem with the method. Yeah, I don't have a problem because if you manage by objective, I've seen young people who are saying, who are talking about narrow feminism, and they are saying, no, these things about women empowerment, they're actually talking about perfumed women. So in other words, they say women empowerment, they are just talking about women who must be CEO, how many women are in parliament, how many, but nobody is talking about how many women whose goods, whose potatoes and apples have been thrown away by the city police in the corridor. No one is talking about the number of women who are suffering on the ground. They are always talking about perfumed women. How many of them are CEOs? How many of them are in parliament? How many? But why are we not asking about the number of women who are in business starting a kapana? Why is it that narrow feminism is not concerned about the entire kapana? Tourists come. Have you ever seen a single quarters there? Everybody who's buying kapana is men. But are we saying there are no women who can do that? But perfumed women are not interested in that because it must be boardroom, CEO, what, managers. So no one must legitimize your struggle. If you are here for a person to tell you this is how you must fight, for as long as you are achieving your objectives, young people, you are doing very well. So don't feel down as if look at him just like how your parents speak to you when you go to school. Yeah, you will not amount to anything. You are better off with a kettle post. But doesn't mean that your mother doesn't want you to go to school. But out of that passion, I'm just, because I understand VJ, sometimes he does the same to me. And he's saying, what are you doing, Job? You are wasting your time. AR must become a political party. I said, no, wait, hold on. We are managing things by objective. So we are proud of you in whatever method and manner that you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you. So there are some other contributions here. Oh, there's a contribution there and then two over here. So we'll take Jessica first and then we'll take the gentleman at the back. All right, we'll take the gentleman, then we'll take Jessica.
Thank you very much. My name is Erlich. First of all, the thing that came to my mind when I was listening to what you were saying, you were talking about disengagement mechanism to interact with the government, loss of interest. You want to be given a platform to engage the government. The only thing that the government have done for you so far, they have given you the right. You are talking about the Constitution. Every citizen has the right to participate in peaceful political activity. What are the responsibility of every citizen within this peaceful activity? Can anybody tell me? We are having the right, we don't have the responsibilities. If you as a youth start now trying to say, what will be my responsibility? From first article in the Namibian Constitution, he's talking about your right. What are your responsibility? Elders, they were fighting for their rights, they were being given the rights. So now this is where the youth comes in and say, what is our responsibilities? You are coming to me with your rights. What must I do with your right? It's your right to organize yourself. It's your right to engage. What are your responsibilities? Right and responsibility go in hand. Most of the people are having degrees. What are we doing with the degrees? No, they cannot employ me. So this is where now the right and responsibility have to come hand in hand. You have been given something, then we sit back, we say, okay, study science. Geologists do what? While you are studying science, we change the lock. You come there, the door is locked. Fend for yourself. So now this is also a part of the young people where you have to come with your responsibilities. You are in a management position, I'm appointed to the board, I'm elected to what? Then you are still asking the responsibility and the right. You are talking about the right. People want to see your contribution. What are you contributing? That's a question for every youth. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So we'll just take Jessica here and then the gentleman over there, and then we're going to move over to the side. Awesome. Right.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, my name is Ndilokelwa Ntengwe. I think I just have a response to some of the comments that were also made around digital democracy and protesting, particularly linked to the social media platforms. And is that we're not considering digital democracy as a different avenue or template for protesting enough. So, because already we've seen how it cascades into real effective change. For example, we shut it all down. It received not only did it receive over 11 million impressions globally, but it also then resulted into the legislative processes that cascaded into us now discussing the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill and the Combating of Rape Act, also linked to currently the National Sex Offender Registry. So that all comes from organizing online with social movements, and then that then affects and goes into real change. And that is also the same with the abortion movement, a petition that was launched purely online that received over 60,000 signatures in our democratic history. So our methods work and they are effective, and I think that this poses a question on what we are doing to safeguard digital democracy as well, especially for us that are using social media to organize and to protest, particularly because we also know that our members of parliament are also on TikTok, they are also on Instagram, they are also on Twitter, and hence we are using those platforms because other avenues have censored us, have silenced us, and have virtually excluded us. And I think that if we find other avenues for protesting, then that should also be admissible. And in that context, youth activism and civic participation has also evolved. You know, as I've mentioned, that we protest using TikTok and Instagram, and that also influences socio-political discourse. Example, recently when we learned about, well, everyone knows with the exclusions for celebrating the Independence Day, all of us took to Twitter, and later on there was then a brief that was, you know, a beautiful brief to say we apologize for that undignified exclusion that many Namibians experienced. That was particularly because we did put our voices to the platforms that are most available for us. And I think really the question is really how do we safeguard our digital spaces and use digital democracy as another template in which we can also advocate, and that also be regarded as an avenue in which effective change can be realized. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I must say that I'm quite impressed by the panelists there. So keep up the good job, guys. I mean, you very much remind me of me when I was that age. And during our time, it was quite difficult to mobilize the youth to engage in this kind of conversations. So for me today to sit here and be able to see you guys doing so eloquently and in a manner in which it's quite heartwarming. My whole point the point that I want to make is the issue of representation, youth representation in decision-making bodies. Because I'm quite concerned with regards to the issue of symbolic and meaningful representation. More often than not, we get a situation in which the leadership uses the youth for symbolic purposes. Mm-hmm. They say, well, we have a 27-year-old deputy minister. I hope she's not here. And so that in itself should mean that the young people are involved or are included in the decision-making processes. So how are you guys how do you go about to get involved in meaningful decision-making processes? Not just symbolic or superficial. Mm-hmm. Because we are talking about, somebody spoke about digital, the whole concept is digital democracy. But you do realize that people don't vote on social media. They vote at the polls. So one of the biggest challenges I always see is that young people are good at mobilizing one another on social media, but when it comes to the real issues or the real events, you usually have low turnouts. If people could vote on social media, we'd probably have Job as our president. You know? So now, how do we then translate that support from, we are talking about now, people have been living in villages and they went on to live in urban areas, urbanization. And now we are saying people are no longer living in urban areas, they have moved on to live on social media. Now, how do you also get the people who are living on social media to actually to effect the change on the ground for instance, like participate in elections. Because I mean, if you are 60% or so of our young people are unemployed, I mean, 45% or so, I don't know, almost 50%. What is it that you guys are planning on doing to ensure that your voices are heard and people get to do things based on your consent and not based on symbolic or hypothetical consent? Do you get my question?
Yes, thank you.
Should I rephrase?
No, we understand. Thank you.
Your question is clear.
Okay. So I just want to say there's only so much we can do as youth. I can't take rice and shove it down someone's throat. Point one. The Youth Quake platform is a platform that was established by the NMT in 2018 to provide youths a safe space to participate and engage in political issues, right? Yes, people feel comfortable to be on social media. Some feel comfortable to be on ground, but we can't take away those voices as well. We need to understand that if there's a lack of access to information, if I don't understand what strengthening democracy is, I won't engage. I won't come to the conference because I have a lack of interest. So just as William mentioned, youth have to be educated. We need access to certain information. That's the only way we'll understand whether it's right or not to participate. I, for instance, have no interest whatsoever in politics, but I'm here today because I want to learn, and it's because it started at home at the NMT where I want to learn. So if someone at home does not understand the dynamics of something, they will not participate. So let's not speak about numbers. The fact that we are here and we speak for youth, that should mean something. Let's take this as a ground to start and build upon. That's all I want to say. Thank you so much to the panelists. You guys did an amazing job.
Thank you. Sorry, did you have a... Oh, all right, awesome, thank you. So we're just going to move over to that side. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, great job. I probably have to tell you that whatever you're doing, it's a process. You're not here to create miracles and all that. But I think that's one of the things we need to encourage young people, that you are part of the process and you're busy contributing in your own unique ways. And it may not be at a large scale, but every small thing that you do will eventually make an impact in its own way. But I'm also, one of the things I'm quite concerned with is that 15 years ago, I would have fallen within the same category of the youth of Namibia, is that because young people are speaking up for themselves, but whether they are actually now not being spoken for is my other concern. And especially when we see young people being co-opted to political positions, and those co-opted youth then become sort of this representatives of the youth. But are they really speaking the youth language, or are they speaking for you? How do you intend to avoid being co-opted, where you simply just become guinea pigs of a political agenda, but not necessarily addressing what the needs of the youth, especially in these critical times that we find ourselves in?
All right, thank you. We'll just take the gentleman over there. Yeah, in the second row.
Greetings. I've seen that a number of us quoting from Article 17 about the peaceful demonstration and etc. But one has to ask himself, has peaceful demonstration worked before? Because we can go back in history, the Arab Spring, Soweto uprising, Soweto uprising, the Black Conscious Movement, Black Lives Matter, all those demonstrations were not peaceful, but they yield good results. We can come back to peaceful means which the government keep on repeating every day. There was an issue of the students we have in Ukraine, our current students that are, some of them are there, some of them came back. Nanso raised an issue that we have students that are in Ukraine, but they cannot access their funds. What did our foreign minister reply? We have not heard of that reply at all. So we currently don't know that how many of our students are in Ukraine that are safe, or how many of our students that have fled to other countries. It's because these organizations that we are seeing today, new organizations like the Quake, what is this? The Youth Quake, and there is NYC, there is NANSO, but none of you guys have raised these issues, excluding NANSO. So peaceful demonstrations have never worked before. So that's why our government keep on hiding behind Article 17. So we need to ensure there need to be institutions, organizations that are actually going to fight robustly with the government for the issues we face on the ground. Because we know the human capital within us, the young people, is quite low. But what is the government doing about that? So whether we like it or not, the youth will reach a boiling point, and that boiling point is only going to go one way, which is protests that are not peaceful at all. Because so now the peaceful demonstration, whatever, it's not working. So it's up to you to come with policies. If those policies don't come, then it's going to be worse and worse every year. I thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that contribution. So unfortunately, we have run out of time, so that will be our last contribution for the day. So before I hand over to Bradley, I'd just like to thank all of our panelists once again. So we had Nonge Kanji, who's the youth advocate for the Trade Union Congress of Namibia. We're joined by Wayne Rukero, who's a candidate attorney, William Minnie, who's the chairperson of the NANSO NAST branch, Lloyd Angula, who's a human rights activist, Napopyo Ulenga, who's a teacher at the Hearing Impaired School in Windhoek, and Rosalind Joseph, who's a board member for the National Youth Council. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. So a last response from everyone. We'll start with you, Napopyo, all over in the corner. 15 seconds.
In short, I think I'd just like to thank NMT for inviting us. It's quite inclusive. As you can see, I'm a youth with disabilities, but I'm here. But thank you, everyone, for making time to be here.
Awesome. Loide, your 15 seconds.
I think I just want to emphasize on how there's a misconception about, as seen evidently from Mr. Shivi, that people expect activism or civic participation to be on the ground and be numbers and be people shouting ooh la la. But in the digital world, I feel like it is very crucial and quintessential that we advocate for the things on a personal level, regardless of the numbers we make, because advocating for something we're believing on a personal level will always result into a bigger impact in some way.
Awesome. Thank you. Wayne.
Well, I'd actually like to have more time to respond to the questions, but it's a pity. But I have to say that this conversation needs to go on. We really need to create spaces where we need to safeguard digital democracy. I think it's critically important in the millennial age, in the tech age that we live in now. And yeah, I really would love to respond to the questions such as the proxies and youth and, you know, questions about rights and responsibilities, but they don't actually create responsibilities, they create obligations. Responsibilities are based upon what your objectives are as a political entity. So these are the questions, for example, the effectiveness of political, peaceful political activities and whatnot that I would like to respond to, but of course, let the conversation continue. And I thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Nonge.
This is definitely the time to say yes to youth. This is definitely the time for the youth to advance the dialogue, for the youth to advance the discourse around democracy in our country. And I think piggybacking off of Wayne, it would definitely be an amazing opportunity for us to have something like this again, to engage with the public more so, even in the digital space, for us to really realize that it is young people who advance this conversation, because ultimately the results will be for us to carry.
Awesome. Thank you, Nonge. William.
As I'm signing out, I'd just like to encourage my peers, the youth, to acquaint themselves with the policies, the laws, and the constitution of our country in order for us to hold our leaders and our lawmakers accountable, in order for us to, when we rise up and we retaliate with protests, so that we come from a point of understanding, so that we say that you are not acting according to this. So I ask my youth, I implore us to familiarize ourselves with the Constitution.
Great, thank you. Rosalind, your final 15 seconds.
Okay. I'm so eager to answer, but okay. Mine is just to say really that I think the youth should also move away from the narrative that National Youth Council is only like a politically based or biased institution, because it was actually established for the youth. So I'm just encouraging the youth also go to the offices and ask what opportunities are there for you. How can you access the opportunities through your representation of your regional platforms, of your constituency forums, all that. So with that said.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
It's a Quake.